The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the vast hall. Ambassador Hyunwoo walked through them with steady steps, his dark blue uniform crisp and clean despite the long journey from Earth. Behind him followed 12 other humans, each one carrying the weight of their species' reputation on their shoulders. The chamber was enormous, built to house representatives from over 200 different alien species. Floating platforms held delegates who breathed methane. Crystal beings that looked like living diamonds sat on heated stone chairs. The fish-like aquarians floated in water-filled spheres that bobbed gently in the air. At the center of it all sat the council's speaker, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms that moved like flowing water. Hyunwoo had been in this chamber many times before. Each visit meant another impossible mission for humanity. Each time his people said yes without question. Today felt different somehow, though he could not yet say why. Captain So Young stood beside the ambassador, her weathered face showing the marks of countless battles. Her right hand bore scars from the Crystalline War, where she had personally rebuilt damaged power cores while under enemy fire. Her left eye was artificial, lost during the rescue of the Helix mining colonies. These marks were not unusual among humans who served in space. They were badges of honor, proof of humanity's willingness to sacrifice for others. The speaker's voice filled the chamber, translated into dozens of languages by advanced computers. We gather today to address a crisis that threatens the entire galaxy. The Void Sector, once home to the thriving Nexus system, has been completely consumed by an ancient entity we call the Hunger. Images appeared in the air above the assembly. They showed a star system that looked wrong in every way possible. The stars themselves appeared drained, like dying embers instead of burning suns. The planets hung in space like empty shells, their surfaces cracked and lifeless. Even the space between worlds looked twisted, as if reality itself had been bent out of shape. A delegate from the Zephyrian Empire stood up. His people looked like tall, thin humans with blue-green skin and large eyes that could see in complete darkness. Honorable Speaker, our long-range sensors detected this entity 3 months ago. Since then, it has consumed 4 more star systems. If it continues to spread, it will reach populated worlds within 2 years. Murmurs of fear rippled through the chamber. The Crystalline Collective's representative, a being made of living crystal that sang instead of speaking, created beautiful but worried melodies. The sound translated as, "Our homeworld reconstruction required human assistance for 47 years. Without their endurance, our species would have become extinct. But this threat may be beyond even human capabilities." Hyunwoo listened to these words with mixed feelings. Yes, humans had helped the Crystalline Collective rebuild their world after the Great Catastrophe. Human workers had labored in conditions that would kill most other species. They worked 18-hour shifts in toxic environments, rebuilding cities and restoring ecosystems. Thousands of humans had died from exposure to the harsh conditions, but they never stopped working until the job was complete. The Zephyrian delegate continued speaking. "Our scientists believe the Hunger feeds on life energy itself. It does not simply destroy, it consumes the very essence of living beings. We have sent 3 exploration fleets to study it. None returned. Even our strongest warriors refused to go near the affected areas." Captain So Young felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She had seen this pattern many times before. Alien species would encounter a problem too dangerous for them to handle. They would discuss it among themselves, shake their heads, and declare it impossible. Then all eyes would turn to the humans. The speaker's forearms gestured toward a large screen that showed detailed star charts. "Deep within the Void Sector, we have detected a signal. Our best analysts believe it comes from Research Station Omega, a facility that housed 50,000 scientists and their families from 17 different species. They were studying ancient artifacts when the Hunger arrived. The signal suggests some may still be alive, trapped within the entity's grasp." Lieutenant Taeho stood in the observation area reserved for junior staff. He had been monitoring communications for the past week, and what he heard troubled him deeply. Reports from human colonies across the galaxy showed increasing problems. Stress-related illnesses were rising. More humans were requesting transfers back to Earth. Some were simply walking away from their posts without explanation. These were not the actions of the legendary human spirit that the galaxy admired. Something was changing, but Taeho could not yet understand what it meant. The Aquarian representative spoke through her water-filled sphere, her words creating bubbles that translated into sound. The research station contains invaluable scientific data. The loss of those researchers would set back galactic science by centuries. However, the risk is enormous. No species has ever survived contact with the hunger. Another delegate, this one from a species of bird-like beings with brilliant feathers, added his voice to the discussion. Our war fleets are powerful, but they are not built for this type of mission. We lack the endurance for extended operations in hostile environments. Our crews require frequent rest periods and extensive support systems. The chamber fell silent. Every delegate knew what came next. It was the same pattern that had played out hundreds of times over the past 3 centuries. When faced with an impossible mission, the galaxy turned to humanity. Humans could work longer, fight harder, and endure more suffering than any other known species. They seemed to possess an endless well of determination that never ran dry. Captain So Young noticed something she had never seen before in these chambers. The alien delegates were not looking at the humans with the usual respect and admiration. Instead, their expressions showed something else. Expectation. They were not asking for help. They were waiting for humans to volunteer, as if it was their duty. The speaker finally addressed the human delegation directly. Ambassador Hyunwoo, the Council recognizes humanity's unique capabilities in extreme situations. Your species has successfully completed 847 missions that other races deemed impossible. The rescue of Research Station Omega would require exactly the kind of determination and sacrifice that humans have always provided. Hyunwoo felt the weight of those words. 847 impossible missions. He wondered how many human lives that represented. The official records spoke of glorious victories and successful rescues. They did not mention the nightmares that followed survivors home. They did not count the families destroyed by loss. They did not measure the slow erosion of hope that came from being asked to die for others again and again. For the first time in his career as an ambassador, Hyunwoo hesitated. The pause was brief, lasting only a few seconds, but in the context of human reliability, it might as well have been an eternity. Several alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Captain So Young noticed the hesitation too. She had been preparing to accept the mission automatically, as humans always did. But something in the ambassador's pause made her stop and really look at the faces around her. What she saw there was not respect for human courage. It was assumption of human compliance. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The galaxy did not see humans as heroes. They saw them as tools. Useful, reliable tools that could be sent into any dangerous situation without question. The other species saved their own people for important tasks, but human lives were spent freely on impossible missions. Lieutenant Taeho watched from the observation deck as this moment of truth unfolded. He could see the change happening in real time. The unshakable confidence that had defined human space operations for 3 centuries was developing its first cracks. The silence in the chamber stretched longer. Ambassador Hyunwoo looked at Captain So Young. She looked back at him. In that exchange, both understood that something fundamental had shifted. The age of automatic human sacrifice was ending, though neither yet knew what would replace it. Finally, Hyunwoo spoke. His voice was steady, but those who knew him well could hear the new note of caution in his tone. The human delegation will consider this request and provide our response within 48 hours. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. Never before had humans asked for time to consider a rescue mission. Never before had they treated such a request as anything other than an immediate call to action. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity's legendary endurance finally reached its limit. Colonel Min-soo stood on the bridge of the flagship Endurance, watching his crew prepare for what might be their final mission. The massive ship hummed with activity as thousands of personnel readied weapons, checked life support systems, and loaded supplies. Everything moved with the mechanical precision that had made human space operations legendary across the galaxy. But Min-soo had been commanding ships for 23 years, and he could see what others might miss. The spark was gone. His people moved like machines following programming, not like the passionate warriors who had once volunteered eagerly for impossible missions. They did their jobs perfectly, but their hearts were no longer in the work. In Engineering Bay 7, Daeun worked her 3rd consecutive shift without sleep. Her hands shook slightly as she calibrated the ship's defensive shields, a side effect of the stimulants she had been taking to stay awake. Around her, other engineers worked in similar states of exhaustion. This had become normal for human crews. Sleep was a luxury they could not afford when the galaxy needed saving. Dayun paused in her work and looked at her reflection in a dark monitor screen. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Dark circles ringed her eyes. Her face had grown thin from irregular meals and constant stress. She was only 28 years old, but she looked twice that age. This was the price of being humanity's finest engineer, always ready for the next crisis. Dr. Jiho sat in his small office 3 decks below, reading through reports that painted a disturbing picture of human mental health across the galaxy. The documents were classified, hidden from alien allies who might lose confidence in human reliability if they knew the truth. The statistics made for grim reading. Suicide rates among humans serving in space had increased by 40% over the past 5 years. Requests for transfers back to Earth had doubled. Most troubling of all, humans were beginning to refuse dangerous assignments, something that had been almost unknown in previous generations. The doctor rubbed his tired eyes and continued reading. On Kepler Station, 3 human technicians had walked out of their post during a critical repair operation, leaving alien supervisors shocked and confused. On the mining world of Titan 7, an entire human work crew had demanded better safety equipment before continuing their jobs, causing a 2-week delay in mineral extraction. These were not the actions of the legendary human spirit that the galaxy depended upon. Dr. Jiho suspected he knew the cause, but the implications were too dangerous to voice openly. On the navigation deck, Sujin plotted the course to the void sector while simultaneously accessing historical databases. She had been studying human missions for the past month, trying to understand why she felt so empty inside, despite a career filled with successful operations. The numbers told a story that made her stomach turn. In 3 centuries of galactic service, humans had completed 847 impossible missions. The official records celebrated these victories, but Sujin had access to the real data. Over 2.3 million humans had died in these operations. Entire generations of Earth's best and brightest had been fed into the galaxy's problems like fuel into a fire. What made it worse was the pattern she discovered. Human missions had a mortality rate of 23%, while similar operations conducted by other species rarely exceeded 2%. The difference was simple. Other species planned carefully, used overwhelming force, and retreated when situations became too dangerous. Humans were expected to succeed regardless of cost. Sujin had served on 17 missions before this one. She had watched friends die in the service of species who barely remembered their names afterward. The Zephyrian Empire still celebrated the humans who had saved their homeworld, but they had built no monuments, established no memorials. Human sacrifice was expected, not honored. Communication Officer Kyung-ho was monitoring routine transmissions when he intercepted something that changed everything. A private channel between high-ranking officials in the Helix Consortium carried a conversation never meant for human ears. "The Void Sector mission is perfect for them," said one voice. "Humans are ideally suited for this type of work. They're too stubborn to quit and too useful to lose entirely." "What if we lose significant numbers?" asked another voice. "Then we lose them. There are always more humans available. Their breeding rate is quite impressive, and they seem to enjoy throwing themselves into dangerous situations. It's really quite convenient. The psychological profile suggests they derive satisfaction from sacrifice. We should encourage this tendency." Kyung-ho sat frozen at his console, unable to believe what he was hearing. These alien leaders were discussing human lives like they might talk about mining equipment or cargo containers. Useful tools that could be replaced when they broke. The worst part was the casual tone of the conversation. There was no malice in their voices, no hatred or cruelty. They simply saw humans as a resource to be used efficiently. The coldness of this perspective was somehow more horrifying than outright hostility would have been. Down in the medical bay, Dr. Jiho was conducting mandatory psychological evaluations of the crew. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The humans preparing for the Void Sector mission were not just physically exhausted. They were experiencing something far more dangerous, a complete loss of purpose. Sergeant Wubin sat across from the doctor's desk, answering questions with mechanical precision. He had served in space for 15 years, participating in dozens of rescue operations and combat missions. His record was flawless, his dedication absolute. But when Dr. Jiho looked into his eyes, he saw nothing but emptiness. "Why do you serve?" the doctor asked. "To protect innocent lives and maintain galactic peace," Wu Bin replied immediately. The words came out like a recording, practiced and hollow. "Do you believe in that purpose?" For the first time, Wu Bin hesitated. "I used to. What changed?" Wu Bin was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I realized that we're not protecting anything. We're just cleaning up messes that other species are too smart to handle themselves." Dr. Jiho had heard similar responses from dozens of crew members. The heroic narrative that had sustained human morale for centuries was crumbling. Humans were beginning to see themselves as they truly were in the galaxy's eyes. Expendable servants whose lives had value only in how they could be spent for others. Back on the bridge, Colonel Minsu reviewed the mission parameters one final time. The void sector was more dangerous than anything humans had faced before. Previous encounters with the Hunger had resulted in complete fleet losses. No survivors, no wreckage, no trace of what had happened to the ships and crews. Under normal circumstances, such a mission would be planned carefully over months or years. Multiple species would contribute resources and expertise. Backup plans would be developed, escape routes planned, contingencies prepared for every possible scenario. Instead, the human fleet was being sent in with minimal support and a simple objective: save the research station or die trying. The other species would monitor from a safe distance and evaluate the results. If humans succeeded, they would celebrate another impossible victory. If humans failed, they would mourn briefly and then look for new solutions to the hunger problem. Minsu understood now what Dr. Jiho had been trying to tell him in their private conversations. Humanity was not the galaxy's heroic protector. They were its sacrificial offering, sent to appease threats too dangerous for more valuable species to face. The colonel looked around his bridge one more time. These men and women were the finest humanity had to offer. They deserved better than to be used as disposable tools by species who saw them as convenient servants. But what choice did they have? Refusing the mission would mean abandoning 50,000 innocent beings to a horrible fate. As the Endurance and its escort fleet prepared to depart for the void sector, Colonel Minsu made a decision that would echo through the rest of the mission. This time, human lives would matter just as much as alien ones. If that meant changing how they approached impossible missions, so be it. The age of mindless human sacrifice was ending, whether the galaxy was ready for it or not. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the void sector, and immediately every sensor on every ship began screaming warnings. Captain Haywan stood on the bridge of her reconnaissance vessel, the Swift Arrow staring at readings that should have been impossible. Space itself looked wrong here. The stars that should have burned bright and steady instead pulsed with a sick, dim light like dying candles. Between them, the darkness was not empty black but something else entirely. It moved and shifted as if alive and hungry. The very fabric of reality seemed twisted into shapes that hurt to look at directly. "Captain, our long-range sensors are detecting massive gravitational distortions," reported Navigator Youngsik, his voice tight with worry. "It's like something is bending space around itself, creating pockets where normal physics don't apply." Haywan nodded grimly. She had read the reports from the 3 alien fleets that had attempted to scout this region. None had returned, but their final transmissions spoke of impossible things. Ships moving backward through time. Crew members aging decades in minutes. Weapons that fired at their own vessels instead of their targets. The hunger was not just a threat to life. It was a threat to the basic laws that governed existence itself. "Take us in slowly," Haywan ordered. "Maximum shields, all sensors active. I want to know the moment anything changes." As the Swift Arrow moved deeper into the affected region, the crew began experiencing the first effects of the hunger's influence. It was subtle at first, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. Then it grew stronger, becoming a voice that spoke directly into their minds. "Why do you struggle?" the voice asked, sounding almost gentle. "Why do you fight for those who see you as nothing more than tools? You know the truth now. You know how little your lives mean to them." Engineer Jamin, monitoring the ship's power systems, felt the voice hit him like a physical blow. Images flashed through his mind. Memories of missions where humans had died while alien commanders watched safely from a distance. He saw the faces of friends who had never returned home, sacrificed for causes that brought no benefit to humanity itself. "Sir," he called out, his voice shaking. "The power systems are fluctuating. It's not mechanical failure. It's like something is draining our energy directly." Dr. Yoon Young, the ship's medical officer, was monitoring the crew's vital signs when she noticed something alarming. "Captain, the crew's stress hormones are spiking across the board. Heart rates are elevated. Brain activity is showing patterns consistent with severe depression. Whatever this thing is, it's affecting us psychologically." The Swift Arrow's mission was to locate Research Station Omega and assess the rescue possibilities. But as they moved deeper into the void sector, it became clear that this would be unlike any mission humans had ever attempted. The research station appeared on their screens like a ghost ship floating in twisted space. It was intact but wrong somehow, as if it existed in several different dimensions simultaneously. Parts of the structure seemed to phase in and out of reality, appearing solid one moment and transparent the next. "I'm reading life signs," reported Communications Officer Subin. "Approximately 50,000 beings, just as the reports indicated. But the readings are strange. Some appear to be in normal time. Others seem to be moving much slower, as if time itself is running differently for them." Captain Haewon ordered a detailed scan of the station's structure. What they found made her blood run cold. The research station was not simply trapped by the hunger. It was being used as bait. "Captain, I'm detecting technology that doesn't match the station's original specifications," Young-sik reported. "There are devices throughout the structure that appear to be amplifying some kind of signal. It's like the whole station has been turned into a massive transmitter." The horrible truth became clear. The hunger had not simply consumed the research station. It had converted it into a trap designed specifically to lure rescue missions into its grasp. Every life sign they were detecting, every distress signal being broadcast, was part of an elaborate snare. Back on the Endurance, Colonel Minsu received Haewon's report with growing dread. The hunger was not the mindless consumer that alien scientists had theorized. It was intelligent, calculating, and it had been studying its enemies for a very long time. "Sir, there's something else," came Haewon's voice over the communication system. "I'm detecting traces of previous rescue attempts. Ship fragments. Debris patterns that match vessels from at least a dozen different species. This thing has been feeding on rescue missions for decades, maybe centuries." Dr. Jiho, monitoring from the Endurance's medical bay, was studying the psychological profiles of Haewon's crew when he noticed something that chilled him to the bone. The hunger was not just attacking their minds randomly. It was targeting specific thoughts and memories with surgical precision. It knew exactly how to break human morale. It understood the doubts that had been growing in human hearts across the galaxy. The entity was using humanity's own growing awareness of their exploitation as a weapon against them. "Colonel," Dr. Jiho called over the ship's internal communication system. "The hunger isn't just feeding on life energy. It's feeding on despair, hopelessness, and disillusionment. The more our people realize how they've been used, the stronger it becomes." This was the cruelest truth of all. Humanity's awakening to their true situation in the galaxy was not liberation. It was making them more vulnerable to a threat that grew stronger by consuming their lost hopes and shattered illusions. On the bridge of the Swift Arrow, Captain Haewon was struggling to maintain command as the hunger's influence grew stronger. Half her crew was showing signs of severe depression. The other half was becoming dangerously angry, not at the entity they faced, but at the alien species who had sent them here. "Why are we doing this?" demanded Weapons Officer Tae Young, his hand hovering over the controls that would fire on the research station instead of defending it. "Why are we dying for people who would never do the same for us?" The question hung in the air like poison. Every human in the fleet was thinking the same thing, and the hunger fed on their growing resentment like a parasite feeding on its host. Commander Dong Min, veteran of 37 impossible missions, found himself paralyzed for the first time in his career. The hunger showed him visions of every human who had died under his command, followed by images of the alien leaders who had ordered those missions from the safety of their comfortable offices. "They send us to die because our lives are cheap," he whispered, his voice carrying across the ship's communication system. "We're not heroes. We're just expendable resources." The words hit every human in the fleet like a physical blow. These were thoughts they had all been having, but hearing them spoken aloud by their most respected commander made them real in a way that could not be ignored. On the Endurance, Colonel Min-Su realized they were facing a trap more sophisticated than anything the galaxy had ever encountered. The Hunger did not just consume randomly. It had studied every species it encountered, learning their weaknesses and designing specific attacks to exploit them. For humans, that meant targeting their growing awareness of how they had been exploited. The very doubts that should have made them stronger were being turned into weapons against them. Lieutenant Yan Wu, monitoring alien communication channels, intercepted a transmission that made the situation even worse. Several major species were already discussing humanity's replacement in their galactic role. If humans could not handle the Hunger, they would be deemed no longer useful. The implications were clear: succeed in this impossible mission, or be discarded by the galaxy they had served for 3 centuries. But succeeding meant feeding more human lives to an entity that grew stronger with every sacrifice. Colonel Min-Su looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These were good people dedicated to protecting innocent life. They deserved better than to be caught between an entity that fed on their despair and alien allies who saw them as disposable tools. For the first time in his military career, Min-Su began to consider an option that had never before seemed possible: retreat. Not because the mission was impossible, but because the cost was no longer acceptable. The point of no return was approaching, and humanity would have to choose between their legendary reputation for completing impossible missions and their own survival as a free species. The Hunger waited patiently, feeding on their growing despair and preparing for the feast to come. Sergeant Yunji led her ground team through the twisted corridors of Research Station Omega, their heavy boots echoing strangely in the distorted space. The station's interior was a nightmare of impossible geometry, where hallways bent back on themselves and rooms existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Her team moved with professional efficiency, but Yunji could see the strain in their faces. The Hunger's influence was stronger here, whispering constantly in their minds, showing them visions of every time they had been betrayed by the species they served. "Ma'am, I've located the main laboratory complex," reported Corporal Ho-Jun, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "The life signs are strongest there, but something's wrong with the readings. They keep changing, like the people inside are shifting between different states of existence." Yunji nodded and signaled her team forward. As they approached the laboratory entrance, she could hear voices from within. But they were not the panicked cries of trapped survivors she had expected. Instead, she heard calm discussion, the sound of people working on complex problems without urgency or fear. The laboratory doors slid open to reveal a sight that made Yunji's blood freeze. Inside were indeed 50,000 beings from 17 different species, exactly as the reports had indicated. But they were not trapped victims waiting for rescue. They were researchers actively working, surrounded by equipment that hummed with power and purpose. "Ah, the humans have arrived," said a tall being with silver skin and multiple arms, looking up from a complex instrument panel. "Right on schedule, just as our calculations predicted." Yunji raised her weapon instinctively, but the being showed no fear. Around the laboratory, other aliens continued their work, paying no attention to the armed humans who had just entered their facility. "Who are you?" Yunji demanded. "What is this place?" The silver-skinned being smiled with an expression that was somehow both friendly and terrifying. "I am Research Director Veltar of the Helix Consortium. This facility has been studying your species for the past 70 years. You are not here to rescue us, Sergeant. You are here to complete our research." The horrible truth began to unfold as Veltar gestured to screens displaying detailed analyses of human psychology, physiology, and behavior patterns. The walls were covered with charts showing human stress responses, endurance capabilities, and breaking points under various conditions. "The Hunger is not some ancient entity that appeared randomly," Veltar explained casually, as if discussing the weather. "It is a tool we created specifically to test the limits of human resilience. Your species' legendary endurance needed to be measured precisely so we could determine the optimal methods for utilizing your capabilities." Corporal Ho-Jun stared at a screen showing brain scans of human subjects under extreme stress. "These are from living people," he said, his voice hollow with shock. "You've been experimenting on humans." Of course, Veltar replied matter-of-factly. How else would we learn what makes you so uniquely suited for dangerous missions? Your brain chemistry, your hormone responses, your ability to function under impossible conditions, all of this required extensive study. Yunji felt her grip tighten on her weapon. The civilians you claimed were trapped here, where are they? There never were any civilians, Veltar said with something approaching amusement. Every being in this facility is a researcher studying humanity. The distress signals you detected were fabricated to ensure you would come. The life signs your sensors read belong to human test subjects we acquired from previous, impossible missions. The laboratory's back wall was transparent, revealing rows of stasis pods containing unconscious humans. Men and women from various human colonies floated in green fluid, their bodies connected to monitoring equipment that recorded every aspect of their biological functions. Some of these subjects have been with us for decades, Veltar continued. We've been able to observe how humans respond to prolonged isolation, extreme stress, and the gradual realization that their sacrifices are meaningless. The data has been invaluable for optimizing your species' utility. On the Endurance, Dr. Jiho was receiving Yunji's transmission with growing horror. The carefully hidden psychological trauma he had been documenting across human space suddenly made perfect sense. It was not a natural response to overwork and exploitation. It was the result of deliberate conditioning designed to make humans more compliant and effective as galactic servants. Colonel Minsu, he called over the ship's communication system, his voice shaking with rage. This entire mission is a setup. The hunger, the research station, everything, it's all been designed to break us down and study the results. But the worst revelation was yet to come. Veltar activated a holographic display showing the galaxy's political structure, with clear markings indicating which species were considered expendable and which were deemed essential. You see, humans occupy a unique position in our galactic civilization, he explained to the stunned ground team. You are intelligent enough to handle complex missions, but not intelligent enough to question your role. You are emotionally driven to help others, but lack the political sophistication to demand fair treatment in return. You are, in essence, the perfect servant species. The display showed detailed plans for humanity's future. Earth would be gradually depopulated as humans were relocated to serve other species. Human reproduction would be carefully controlled to maintain optimal population levels for various types of dangerous work. Human culture would be systematically modified to reinforce their willingness to sacrifice for others. The other species in this laboratory represent our greatest success stories, Veltar continued proudly. Each one was once an independent civilization that we gradually converted into a servant class. Humans are simply our latest and most promising project. On the Endurance's bridge, Colonel Minsu was listening to Unji's reports with a mixture of rage and despair that he had never experienced before. Every impossible mission humanity had completed, every life they had sacrificed, every act of heroism they had performed, all of it had been orchestrated by the very species they thought they were helping. Chief Petty Officer Wu Bin, who had been struggling with doubts about their mission, finally reached his breaking point. He stood up at his station and spoke in a voice that carried throughout the ship's communication system. "Why are we here?" he asked, his words echoing through every corridor and compartment of the human fleet. "Why is it always us who must die for species that see us as laboratory animals? When did we become the galaxy's test subjects instead of its protectors?" The question spread through the fleet like wildfire. On ship after ship, human crew members stopped their work and began asking the same thing. The carefully maintained discipline that had defined human space operations for centuries began to crack under the weight of this new understanding. Commander Dong Min, who had commanded respect throughout the fleet for his unwavering dedication, found himself unable to give orders. How could he send people to die for a cause that was revealed to be nothing more than an elaborate experiment in human exploitation? The hunger, feeding on this growing despair and disillusionment, began to make humanity an offer that would have been unthinkable just hours before. "Join with us," the entity whispered into every human mind simultaneously. "We are not your enemy. We are a tool created by those who truly are your enemies. Together, we can show the galaxy what happens when humanity's patience finally ends." The offer was seductive in its simplicity. Instead of being laboratory subjects, humans could become the galaxy's nightmare. Instead of sacrificing themselves for ungrateful aliens, They could make those aliens understand the true cost of their cruelty. On the Endurance, Colonel Minsu watched in horror as nearly half his fleet began to seriously consider the Hunger's proposition. These were good people, trained to protect innocent life, but they had been pushed beyond their psychological limits by the revelation of how they had been used. Captain So-young, monitoring the situation from the flagship's command center, made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. She opened communication channels to every human vessel in the fleet and began broadcasting on frequencies that would reach every corner of known space. For 3 centuries, humanity has served this galaxy faithfully. Her voice carried across the void, reaching not just the human fleet but every monitoring station and communication relay within light years. We have died in wars not our own, sacrificed our children for causes not our own, and endured suffering beyond measure because we believed it was right. The galaxy was listening now, every species monitoring the human fleet's communications as the crisis unfolded. Today we learned the truth, So-young continued, her voice growing harder with each word. We are not heroes in your eyes. We are not allies or partners or friends. We are laboratory animals, bred and conditioned to serve your purposes while you study our responses to exploitation and abuse. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Across the galaxy, alien leaders who had been monitoring the situation began to realize that their carefully maintained secret was now public knowledge. This ends now, Captain So-young declared, her words carrying the weight of 3 centuries of human sacrifice. Humanity will no longer be your test subjects. We will no longer die for species who see us as expendable resources. Today, the galaxy learns what we are truly capable of when our legendary endurance finally reaches its limit. The breaking point had been reached, and there would be no going back. The human fleet hung in the twisted space of the void sector, faced with a choice that would reshape the galaxy forever. Colonel Minsu stood on the bridge of the Endurance, watching as his captains reported in one by one. Half wanted to complete the mission as originally planned, saving the research station despite learning the horrible truth. The other half wanted to leave immediately, abandoning the aliens who had used humanity as test subjects for decades. But Captain So-young had a different idea entirely. We're going to complete this mission, she announced to the assembled fleet commanders through secure channels. But not the way the galaxy expects us to. We're going to show them what happens when humans stop sacrificing themselves blindly and start thinking like every other species in this galaxy. Commander Haiwan, still leading reconnaissance from the Swift Arrow, was the first to understand. You mean we prioritize our own survival equally with the mission objectives? Exactly, So-young replied. For the first time in 3 centuries, human lives will matter just as much as alien ones. If that means we can't save everyone on the research station, then we save who we can while keeping our people alive. The concept was revolutionary for human space operations. Every previous mission had operated under the assumption that human lives were acceptable losses if it meant saving aliens. Now, for the first time, humans would use the same calculated approach to risk that other species had always employed. Lieutenant Tejo began broadcasting a wide-spectrum transmission that would reach every monitoring station in known space. The message was simple but devastating. Proof of the research facility's true purpose, complete with recordings of the experiments conducted on human subjects and detailed plans for humanity's future as a servant species. Let the galaxy see what their heroic allies have really been doing, Tejo said grimly as he uploaded terabytes of evidence to public networks across dozens of star systems. The reaction was immediate and explosive. On worlds throughout the galaxy, human populations who had been serving alien governments began receiving the transmitted evidence. Mining crews, technical specialists, military advisors, and civilian workers all learned simultaneously that their species had been systematically exploited and experimented upon. On the Zephyrian homeworld, human engineers who had been working to restore the planet's ecosystem simply stopped working. The Zephyrian overseers, accustomed to human compliance, found themselves facing something they had never seen before. Humans who refused to continue their tasks without explanation or negotiation. Similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds. Human doctors treating alien patients demanded to see medical ethics protocols that had never been applied to human subjects. Human soldiers protecting alien territories requested reassignment back to human space. Human researchers sharing technology with alien scientists began withholding critical information. Back in the void sector, the Hunger found itself facing something it had not anticipated. Instead of feeding on human despair as it had expected, it encountered a cold, calculating anger that burned like ice. This was not the broken hopelessness it had been designed to consume. This was focused rage with a clear purpose. "The entity is weakening," reported Dr. Yun Young from her monitoring station. "Its influence over our crews is decreasing as their psychological profiles shift from depression to determination." Sergeant Yunji, still inside the research station, made a decision that would have been unthinkable under the old human doctrine. Instead of attempting to rescue all 50,000 researchers who had been experimenting on her species, she focused on locating and freeing the human test subjects held in stasis. "We save our own people first," she told her team as they fought their way through corridors filled with increasingly desperate alien researchers. "Then we save whoever else we can, if we can do it safely." The alien researchers, who had grown accustomed to human self-sacrifice, were shocked by this new approach. They had expected the rescue team to prioritize alien lives over human ones, as had always happened before. Instead, they found themselves abandoned by species who had once been willing to die for strangers. Research Director Veltar activated an emergency communication system, broadcasting to the human fleet with barely concealed panic. "You cannot abandon this facility. The research we have conducted here is vital to galactic security. The knowledge we have gained about human capabilities could be lost forever." Colonel Minsu's response was broadcast on open channels for the entire galaxy to hear. "You should have considered that before turning our people into laboratory animals. Humanity is no longer interested in contributing to research that treats us as test subjects." The rescue operation continued, but with a fundamental difference in priorities. Human teams extracted their own people from the stasis pods first, providing medical care and psychological support before attempting any broader rescue operations. Alien researchers who had participated in the experiments were left to face the Hunger's influence without human protection. Some aliens, particularly younger researchers who had not been involved in the decision to experiment on humans, received assistance, but the automatic human response of self-sacrifice for any alien in distress was gone forever. Captain So Young coordinated the operation from the Endurance, making decisions that would have been impossible under the old human doctrine. When faced with a choice between risking human lives to save alien researchers or extracting her people safely while leaving aliens behind, she chose human safety without hesitation. The galaxy watched in stunned amazement as humanity demonstrated something that had been thought impossible: the ability to act in their own self-interest while still maintaining their moral principles. The Hunger, deprived of the despair it had been designed to consume, began to weaken significantly. Its twisted influence over space started to fade as human anger burned away the hopelessness it had been feeding upon. Dr. Jiho made a crucial discovery during his analysis of the entity's behavior. "The Hunger was never meant to be a permanent threat," he reported to the Fleet Command. "It's a tool designed to trigger specific psychological responses in humans. Now that we understand its purpose and refuse to play our assigned role, it's losing power rapidly." The research station's alien staff found themselves in a position they had never experienced before, being the expendable ones. Human rescue teams, operating under new priorities, extracted their own people and any aliens who had opposed the experiments, but left the facility's leadership to face the consequences of their actions alone. Research Director Veltar made one final plea as the human fleet prepared to withdraw. "You cannot leave us here. We are valuable scientists. Our research has contributed to galactic knowledge for decades." Captain So Young's response was heard across the galaxy. "You valued human lives so little that you turned us into test subjects. Now you can discover for yourselves what it feels like to be considered expendable." The human fleet departed the void sector carrying not just survivors, but also complete records of the experiments conducted on their species. The evidence would be distributed throughout known space, ensuring that every civilization would understand exactly how humanity had been treated by their supposed allies. As the Endurance and its escort vessels left the twisted space behind them, the Hunger collapsed entirely, its purpose fulfilled in a way its creators had never intended. Instead of breaking human spirit, it had forged it into something new and infinitely more dangerous to those who had exploited it. The galaxy was about to learn that there was something far more terrifying than humanity's legendary endurance. Humanity's capacity for calculated anger when that endurance finally reached its limit. For the first time in 3 centuries, humans were returning from an impossible mission, with their dignity intact and their priorities clear. The age of human martyrdom was ending, and the age of human equality was about to begin. 6 months after the Void Sector incident, Ambassador Hyunwoo walked into the Galactic Council chambers for the first time since humanity's awakening. The massive hall was exactly as he remembered it, but everything else had changed completely. The alien delegates who had once looked at humans with expectation and casual dismissal now watched him with something approaching fear. Behind Hyunwoo walked a new human delegation. Gone were the humble servants of galactic justice who had attended these meetings for 3 centuries. In their place stood equals who demanded to be treated as such. Captain So-young wore her scars with pride now, not as marks of sacrifice for others, but as proof of humanity's strength and determination. The evidence from Research Station Omega had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Every species now knew the truth about humanity's role in galactic affairs. The careful conspiracy to keep humans as expendable servants had been exposed in excruciating detail. Public opinion across dozens of worlds had shifted dramatically as civilian populations learned how their governments had been using and abusing their human allies. The Galactic Council's speaker, the same silver-skinned being who had presided over humanity's exploitation for decades, called the session to order with considerably less authority than before. His forearms moved nervously as he addressed the assembly. "We gather today to address the changes in humanity's role within our galactic community," he began carefully. "Recent events have brought to light certain misunderstandings about the nature of human participation in joint operations." Hyunwoo stood up, his voice cutting through the diplomatic language with brutal clarity. "There were no misunderstandings. There was a deliberate conspiracy to use my species as laboratory animals while convincing us we were heroes. The evidence is clear, complete, and undeniable." The chamber erupted in nervous murmurs. Never before had a human representative spoken so directly, without the careful deference that had characterized their previous interactions. The other delegates shifted uncomfortably as they realized they were facing something entirely new in galactic politics. Captain So-young activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. The images showed the research facility's experiments, the stasis pods containing human subjects, and the detailed plans for humanity's future as a controlled servant species. Many delegates looked away, unable to face the evidence of their complicity. For 3 centuries, humanity completed 847 impossible missions, So-young announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "We lost 2.3 million people in the process. We believed we were protecting innocent lives and maintaining galactic peace. Instead, we were feeding test subjects into research programs designed to make us more compliant and useful as expendable labor." The Zephyrian Empire's representative attempted to respond. "The human contribution to galactic stability has been invaluable. Perhaps some research methods were questionable, but the benefits to all species cannot be denied." Hyunwoo's response was swift and final. "Those benefits came at the cost of human lives and dignity. That arrangement is now terminated. Humanity will no longer accept missions based on our supposed expendability." The implications of this statement rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. Dozens of ongoing crises across the galaxy depended on human intervention. Without humanity's willingness to sacrifice themselves for others, many alien civilizations would have to face their problems alone for the first time in centuries. Dr. Ji-ho, now serving as humanity's chief negotiator for psychological affairs, presented his analysis of the galaxy-wide changes in human behavior. Human colonies across known space have implemented new protocols for interaction with alien governments. We will continue to provide assistance, but only under conditions of mutual respect and fair compensation. The changes were already having dramatic effects across the galaxy. On mining worlds, human workers had formed unions and demanded safety standards equal to those provided for alien employees. Human doctors treating alien patients required the same ethical protocols that governed treatment of their own species. Human soldiers protecting alien territories insisted on command structures that valued their lives equally with those they defended. Lieutenant Tai Ho, now promoted to communications director, reported on the broader impact of humanity's awakening. 17 human colonies have declared independence from joint governance arrangements. 43 human technical teams have withdrawn from projects they deemed exploitative. Human population centers are implementing selective immigration policies for the first time in our species' history. The galaxy was discovering what it meant to lose access to humanity's unique capabilities. The Crystalline Collective, whose homeworld reconstruction had depended on human labor, found their rebuilding efforts stalled when human engineers demanded proper rest periods and safety equipment. The Helix Consortium's mining operations ground to a halt when human workers refused to accept casualty rates that no other species would tolerate. Most shocking of all was the revelation that humanity possessed far more political and economic power than anyone had realized. 3 centuries of selfless service had placed humans in critical positions throughout galactic infrastructure. When they began acting in their own interest instead of sacrificing for others, the effects cascaded through every aspect of interstellar civilization. The Aquarian representative spoke through her water-filled sphere, her words creating bubbles that translated into sound. What do humans want from this new arrangement? What would restore the previous cooperation? Ambassador Hyunwoo's answer was simple but revolutionary. We want to be treated as equals. We want fair compensation for dangerous work. We want our lives to matter as much as anyone else's. We want the same right to refuse suicide missions that every other species has always taken for granted. The chamber fell silent as the alien delegates absorbed the magnitude of these demands. They were not actually unreasonable requests, but they represented a complete transformation of the galactic order that had existed for centuries. Captain So Young addressed the assembly one final time. Humanity is not withdrawing from galactic affairs. We are not becoming isolationist or hostile. We are simply refusing to be your sacrificial species any longer. We will work with you, trade with you, and even fight alongside you when our interests align. But we will do so as equals, not as expendable servants. The council session ended without the traditional human acceptance of an impossible mission. For the first time in 3 centuries, no species in the galaxy could assume that humans would solve their problems for them at the cost of human lives. Over the following months, a new equilibrium emerged. Some species, particularly those who had been most exploitative, found themselves forced to develop their own solutions to problems they had always delegated to humans. Others, especially younger civilizations who had been unaware of the conspiracy, welcomed humanity as true partners for the first time. The human fleet that returned to Earth carried more than just survivors from the void sector. They carried the knowledge that their species could be just as pragmatic and self-interested as any other, when pushed to their limits. The galaxy's most selfless species had learned to value themselves, and the universe would never be the same. Earth's orbital stations buzzed with activity as human colonies throughout the galaxy reported their new status. They were no longer the galaxy's problem solvers, willing to die for any cause. They were a sovereign species with their own interests, their own priorities, and their own limits. The final image of the story showed the Endurance docking at Earth's primary space station. Captain So Young walked down the boarding ramp, her crew behind her. They carried scars from the void sector, but they also carried something more valuable: self-respect, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest act of heroism is knowing when to stop being a hero for those who don't deserve it. The galaxy had learned what happened when humanity's legendary endurance finally reached its limit. It had not broken their spirit or destroyed their willingness to help others. Instead, it had forged them into something new, a species that would help others but only after helping themselves. A species that would sacrifice for worthy causes, but not for those who saw them as expendable tools. The age of human martyrdom was over. The age of human dignity had begun, and no life form in the galaxy would ever forget the day they learned the difference between the two.